Okay, which neuron releases acetylcholine? Which neuron releases norepinephrine? What receptors like NE? And what receptors like ACH? So the answers were already in order. A, B, C, D. Okay, so for those that may have not gotten these last week, here are the copies. So if you were here, you got these. These are these packets that have the divisions drawn. So if you didn't grab one, I remembered to bring them today. This packet is basically what we're going to be covering this week, or today. Everything's drawn out for you already, and that's going to help you kind of have an understanding of what's being released, what receptors are present, what division we're referring to, and stuff like that. These are the same thing that's in the textbook, just not as pretty because the textbook is professional artists, so it makes a little bit more sense. Okay, our two divisions are sympathetic and parasympathetic. These divisions are going to leave the brain and spinal cord, and they're going to go innervate structures and organs throughout the body. Organs that get innervated by both systems, what is that fancy term? That get innervated by both. Everyone agree? Did everyone hear that? Say it loud. What do y'all think? Yes, okay. So are every organ in your body duly innervated? Does everything get duly innervated in your body? No. So we can just look at this picture. This is just a simplistic picture that's showing what can be innervated. If you look here at the heart, the sympathetic division goes to the heart. Does the parasympathetic division goes to the heart? Look at the picture. Do y'all see an arrow to the parasympathetic and sympathetic system for heart? So is the heart duly innervated? Okay. Now, look on top of the kidney. There's a little gland on top of the kidney called the adrenal gland. Do you see arrows with both systems to the adrenal gland? So, is the adrenal gland duly innervated? No. Not every structure in the body is duly innervated. If something is only innervated by one system, what system do you think it is? It is the sympathetic. So sympathetic is going to have wider spread effects than the parasympathetic. Okay, we call these systems antagonistic. That word is just a fancy word for opposite. So in general, if you look up here, it says sympathetic inhibits saliva production. Parasympathetic, what's the opposite of inhibit? Yeah, it causes it. So parasympathetic is going to increase saliva production. So they're opposite effects in almost every case. Sympathetic accelerates the heart. Parasympathetic is going to do what? Slow it down. So in general, opposite effects, that's antagonistic. Is every organ going to have opposite effects by both systems? No, because not every organ is what? What's that fancy word? Duly innervated. Okay, so when we're looking at these two systems, we're going to start talking about where that first neuron exits. So I want you to look at the sympathetic here. Whoops, this way. The sympathetic here. It's in the red. Do y'all see how there's red dots in basically your thoracic and your sacral region of the, thoracic and lumbar region? And then over here, do y'all see dots in the parasympathetic region? Okay. Do you see dots up here in the sympathetic region? But do you see dots over here in the parasympathetic? Okay, so where these neurons, that first neuron in the motor pathway exits is going to be a little different for each region. So we're going to start off with the parasympathetic. That's the first picture on y'all's packet. Okay. I left the back. I only made these one-sided, so if y'all want to take notes, you have more room. But I also left a lot of lines throughout here, so you can make little notes throughout. Okay, if you look at the parasympathetic system, the first neuron is exiting part of the brain and the sacral region of the spinal cord. Because of where that first neuron exits, we call the parasympathetic division, we also refer to it as the craniosacral division. Cranial refers to what? Head. Yeah, so that's where the brain is. And sacral refers to between the hips. So basically lower spinal cord. So that first neuron in the motor pathway is going to exit the craniosacral areas. That cranial area is not your entire brain, it's just the brain stem. So that's basically the lower portion of the brain. So when we talk about parasympathetic, that really tells us the function. What is those two words you can use to describe function of parasympathetic? Rest and digest. The craniosacral term tells us where that first neuron exits. So one's more function, one's more location. They're referring to the same thing, it's just different meanings behind them. Okay, now, when we talk about parasympathetic function, rest and digest is a really brief overview. Do y'all remember that term that I gave y'all on Tuesday, those letters? SLUD. SLUD gives you a little bit more detail. Salivation, lacrimation, lactation. What's the U? What's the one of the D's? And what's the other D? Okay, so those are just little tricks to help you understand main functions. Okay. Now, how many neurons do we have in the motor pathway, in the autonomic system? How many neurons? What do y'all think? In the autonomic, just in general. And 2, okay. Now, this picture is much more complicated than the one I just showed you. This picture is giving you a simplistic overview of what the parasympathetic system can do. This system is kind of showing you the actual pathways. What I want you to see in this picture, there's a few different things. 1, we have neurons leaving the brainstem, way up there. Do we have any neurons leaving your long portion of the spinal cord? And then we have neurons leaving the sacral region. So that's craniosacral. The other thing that you might need to look really closely for, so it might be easier to look at the screen closer to you, is we're going to have 2 neurons. In every pathway, we're going to have a solid neuron. So this one's the first neuron. Here's the first neuron. And then we're going to have a dotted neuron. So this is just representing 2 separate neurons for us. How many neurons do we have in the motor pathway? 2. What do we call the neuron prior to that swelling? What do we call the neuron after that swelling? So if you looked in your textbook, this picture's straight from your textbook, there's a key. The preganglionic ones are the solid ones. That's the one I put the 1 by. The postganglionic ones are the dotted ones. And that's the one I put the 2 by. Okay, so this picture is just another way to demonstrate and show you what the parasympathetic system looks like. Okay. Now, since the first neuron of the parasympathetic system leaves the brainstem, so that's the cranial part, it's actually the nerves, the motor neurons leaving are actually part of your cranial nerves. So how many cranial nerves do we have? Do y'all know this number? Yeah, we got 12 pairs. So 4 of these cranial nerves are working with your parasympathetic system. And that's where the cranial term comes from. These 4 cranial nerves are exiting the brainstem. That's the lower part of the brain. And these 4 cranial nerves are 3, 7, 9, and 10. Now you're going to want to know their names, and I have their names written down here: oculomotor, facial, glossopharyngeal, and vagus. But when you remember them, it's easier to go 3, 7, 9, and 10. Parasympathetic does it again. Just little tricks to help you remember. 3, 7, 9, and 10. Parasympathetic does it again. These are the 4 cranial nerves that are involved with the parasympathetic system. Now, if you look on that sheet I drew, you already wrote out the numbers for you. So it's really just all you need is to write the terms. And you can always look these up. Now, how many neurons are going to be in these pathways, though? This is the motor pathway. How many neurons are we going to have? 2. So if you look closely, this preganglionic neuron in this picture is red. The postganglionic neurons are black. So we still have 2 neurons. They're just showing you a little differently in this one. Okay. Now, cranial nerve 3, oculomotor. Oculo, what does that sound like? And what does motor tell us? Movement or sensing? So what do you think the oculomotor neuron can help with? Eye movement, you got it. Now, specifically, the oculomotor neuron is going to go to the ciliary muscles in your eye, so pupils. So you know how your pupil can get bigger and smaller? That's just a hole. It's actually the muscles that surround that. These are called the ciliary muscles. So your oculomotor helps control pupil size. Now, what do we need to do for our eyes to keep them moist? What? Yeah, we need to have some tear productions, lacrimation. So the facial nerve is going to go to the lacrimal gland. That's going to be tear production. And what do we need to produce when we're eating? The facial nerve also goes to salivary glands. Glosso means tongue. What is pharyngeal? Do you remember this term from lab? Means your throat. Okay, your glossopharyngeal. This nerve has lots of different functions, but the function it has to do with the parasympathetic is, what do we do when we eat? What do we need to produce in our mouth? So it also helps different saliva glands, so salivary glands. So a lot of these nerves are going to overlap in function. And then our last nerve is the vagus nerve. I like to call it the vagus nerve because when you go to Vegas, you eat good food, you party, your heart rate is going to be affected, your breathing rate is going to be affected, your digestion is going to be affected. All this stuff is caused from Vegas. Okay, the vagus nerve is the only cranial nerve that actually wanders down to your torso. So all the other cranial nerves are staying around your neck and up. The vagus nerve goes all the way down to your digestive system. The word vagus means vagrant, which means wandering. Now, vagus nerve is going to contain 80% of your parasympathetic system's function. So 80% of the parasympathetic function goes through this nerve. That's a lot. So if this nerve is damaged, what system's going to have a lot of problems? But which system? Parasympathetic or sympathetic? Yeah. A lot of systems will be affected, digestive, respiratory, cardiovascular, but the parasympathetic system is going to be heavily affected because 80% of its function is through this one nerve that wanders down to the torso. All the others stay around the head and neck. So since this is the parasympathetic system, is that vagus nerve going to tell the heart to speed up or slow down? Rest and digest. Okay, is it going to tell your lungs to take in more air? So basically everything gets larger to take in more, or is it going to let your lungs kind of just relax and get smaller so because it doesn't need as much? Yeah, relax. Think about when you are running. Are your blood vessels and all of your vessels bringing oxygen, are they going to be bigger or smaller? Constricted or dilated? They're going to be dilated. They're going to be bigger because we need to get more blood flow through them, more oxygen. So if you're just resting, your lungs, bronchioles that bring in air, they're not going to be very big. They're just going to be their small size. Okay, what about the digestive system? Parasympathetic, is that going to increase digestion or decrease digestion? Why would it increase? What is the parasympathetic's job? What are the 2 words of its job? Yeah, rest and digest. So for the digestion, it's going to increase digestion. Okay. Now, that's just the cranial portion. Y'all see the sacral portion? It's going to go to the organs that are mostly lower in the body. So it's going to go to your reproductive organs, the urinary organs. And then do you see how it gets really messy right here? That's just called a plexus. It's when everything starts to intertwine. A plexus means a braid. So all these nerves still work together to go to multiple organs. So the craniosacral is just telling us where that first neuron exits the brain and the spinal cord. How many cranial nerves are involved? Which cranial nerve or nerves goes to salivary glands? Facial. Which cranial nerve is going to control light into your eyeball? Which cranial nerve is basically controlling everything from your neck to your groin? Yeah. Okay. Now it's actually pronounced vagus, but I call it vagus all the time because it helps you remember function. Now the sacral region is going to be lower because that's between your hips. So that's going to be mostly reproductive, urinary organs again. And they will intertwine and overlap with some of the vagus nerve. It makes that messy braid.
There's a 5, a Roman numeral 5, but is that supposed to be a 10?
Where are we looking?
On the right of the page, this heart lungs with the gallbladder.
Yes, that's supposed to be a 10. I have never seen that. I just drew this last semester and I never caught that. Do y'all see where John Dean's talking about? On the first page, I have 2 M's listed. The second M is saying heart, lungs, liver, goes down those. That's supposed to be Roman numeral 10, which is an X, not a 5, not a V. That was just sloppy on my behalf. Okay. Okay. Now, what we're about to go over is the actual pathway of the parasympathetic. We've actually gone over this on Tuesday, so we've gone over it in detail. Now we're just going to really put it to context. Now, this picture I have up on the board right now is only showing you from the spinal cord, so it's only really showing you from the sacral region. But where else could this picture be coming from since it's parasympathetic? The brainstem. So it could be coming from this top region too. The book just didn't give me a picture to show y'all of that. So that's why I had to draw this for y'all. Okay, so let's look at this picture. How many neurons do we have in this picture? Motor neurons. We have 2. Okay, what do we call that first motor neuron? Preganglionic. What do we call that second motor neuron? Okay, what is the only thing that this system releases? Acetylcholine. Okay, so when we're looking at this picture that I gave y'all and y'all are filling it in, let me do something real quick. Okay. So this is the picture that y'all have. Y'all have this sacral region and y'all have this cranial region. Okay. We have this first neuron leaving here. What do we call this first neuron? Okay. What does this first neuron always produce? Since it always releases ACH, what type of neuron is this neuron? Okay, so do y'all see on this list, I have blank neuron, and then I have blank type of neuron. Everyone sees that on this packet? Okay, so the name of the neuron is preganglionic. The type of neuron is cholinergic. Okay, what do we call that second neuron? And in the sympathetic system, what does the second neuron always release? In the parasympathetic system. In the parasympathetic system, what does the second neuron always release? Since it always releases ACH, what type of neuron is this second neuron? You got it. That's because you weren't here on Tuesday. You missed a lot of material. Okay, now, where do these two neurons meet each other? At the ganglion. So let me draw the ganglion in. The only reason I'm using different colors is just so you can see it. These colors mean nothing. In the body, everything looks the exact same. Okay, now, these ganglion are where they meet. Now, every system, parasympathetic, sympathetic, is going to have a lot of ganglion. At this point, we've only called them ganglion. But if doctors are working on your body or they're trying to target something, they're going to need to be more specific. If you just say ganglion, you're referring to everything from head to toe. So you want to be much more specific. So every ganglion is going to have very specific names. Now, in this parasympathetic system, the ganglion are going to be found at the end of the pathway. So even though there's two neurons, it's still going to be found at the end of the pathway. What's another word for end that we keep bringing up throughout this semester? Yes, say it. If you have a really bad disease and you know it's going to end your life, we call it a what disease? Okay. These ganglion are known as terminal ganglion. The terminal ganglion are going to be found at the end of the pathway, or they're going to be found in the effector organ. So they're going to be found at the end of the pathway, or they're going to be found in the effector organ. So the terminal ganglion are going to be found at the end of the pathway or in the effector organ. And this is a great example of why they get their name terminal. Okay, if you look really closely, here's our first motor neuron exiting the spinal cord. So this is our first one. What do we call that first one? Okay, it's our preganglionic. Okay, now you have to look super closely, but here is a dotted second neuron right here. What do we call this dotted second neuron? So we still have our two neurons. Where the neurons meet is where the ganglion forms. Notice that these two neurons are meeting in the bladder. So it's basically at the end of the pathway. So what's the name of the ganglion at the end of the pathway? Okay, so the terminal ganglia in this particular case is actually at the end of the pathway. So that's where they get their names. So if you understand the naming, it helps you remember where it's located. Okay. Okay, now, since we're releasing ACH all the time, are we going to have cholinergic receptors or adrenergic receptors? Which one? ACH, acetylcholine, is going to need what type of receptors? Cholinergic. What are our two cholinergic receptors? And muscarinic. Okay. Now, which one do we need first always? What do we need to do before we can get high? We need to smoke before we can get high. So which one is the smoking one? So that's the first in the pathway. And then what is the mushroom one? The second one. Okay. So I'm just going to put some numbers out here just to help guide us. These numbers do not really pertain to anything. It's just to help guide. So this is 1. This is going to be 2. And then let me draw our effectors. Our effectors are going to be heart, smooth muscle, or glands. Okay, and these are going to be 3. The nicotinic, are they going to be, the nicotinic receptors, are they going to be on 1, 2, or 3? So 1's still in the brain and spinal cord. Where do we release ACH? We release ACH right before 2. So when we look here, this is where our nicotinic receptors are going to be. So I'm just drawing an N for nicotinic. Now, those nicotinic receptors, when they attach to ACH, the ACH is going to open them. Are we going to want that second neuron to fire or to inhibit? So is that depolarization or hyper? So we want the second neuron to always fire. So we always want depolarization. And that means the second neuron is going to release ACH. When it releases ACH, that means we need cholinergic receptors. Are those receptors going to be on 1, 2, or 3? Okay, and what are the second receptors always? I'm just going to use an M for muscarinic. Okay, now no matter what I ask you, as long as you know the functions of parasympathetic, you can figure out everything. Parasympathetic, what's the two-letter or two-word name for it? Rest and digest. So no matter what I ask you, if you can think about what's going on in your body during rest and digest, you can figure it out. So smooth muscle of your intestines. Your intestines are involved in what? Digestion. So are we going to increase that or decrease that? So when ACH attaches to the smooth muscle in the intestines, it's going to cause depolarization or hyper. Yeah, we want it to excite it. Okay. Rest and digest. When ACH attaches to muscarinic on the heart, is it going to tell your heart to speed up or slow down? Okay. Salivary glands, rest and digest. Is it going to tell salivary glands to inhibit or to produce? Okay. So no matter what I give you, if you just think about what your body's doing during rest and digest, you can figure out, is it going to speed it up or slow it down? If you are sitting, should you be breathing really heavily? No. So are we going to tell your lung functions to bring in more air, speed up, or slow down? Yeah, they're just going to stay quiet, okay? So you can pretty much figure out what's going to happen as long as you know those little key facts about rest and digest. Okay, so here's just another picture drawn out. What's this first neuron called right here? And the preganglionic neurons in this division always release what? Okay. Since they're releasing ACH, what type of receptor is going to be on this second neuron? It is cholinergic. Let's be more specific. Okay. Are we going to excite this neuron or slow it down? And what does that second neuron always release? Okay. Now, we're releasing acetylcholine, but it's going to the effector. We have nicotinic. We got to smoke before we get high. What are these receptors here? Okay. Now, depending on the effector, can it cause depolarization? Yeah, we can excite it. Can it also inhibit it? Yeah, it just depends on where in the body we refer to. Okay. So let me get this ready. I'll give you 5 minutes for this one. Give it a second. Okay, now y'all should be able to go. Sorry about that. Make sure you read those directions. They're going to help guide you. What system is this picture showing us? That's going to help y'all out a lot. Is this parasympathetic or sympathetic? Parasympathetic. That's going to make the difference in your answers. I don't know, can you? Okay, 2.5 minutes. Okay, 6 people are missing answers, and most people's clickers seem to be down. So if I stop it, everyone's good. I take that as a yes. Y'all still working? Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, so I tried to give y'all a big hint. What system is this? Since it's the parasympathetic system, what is the only neurotransmitter released? So I can automatically get rid of this. What is NE also associated with? What neurons release NE? I can get rid of this. And then what receptors are associated with adrenergic? Okay, so does that give y'all a few less answers to have to worry about? Okay, so number 1, what type of neuron is the preganglionic neuron? Cholinergic. Okay, that leads us directly to number 2, what neurotransmitter is released? That's your only option. Okay, what receptors are always first that like ACH? Okay, and then what type of neuron is that postganglionic neuron? Cholinergic, because it releases what? ACH. So it might have been easier to answer 2 and 5 first to help lead you for 1 and 4. Okay, now what receptor likes ACH that's second in the pathway? Now, what do we call that ganglion, that big yellow blob? What's the specific name for that ganglion? That's your terminal, and it gets its name because it's found in the beginning or the end of the motor pathway. The end, you got it. Okay. This is a little tougher one. Let me get this one started. Okay, now before we even get started, hyperpolarization, is that inhibiting or exciting? Okay, so that should help. And then what is depolarization? Okay, so kind of keep that in mind. Number 2 doesn't necessarily refer to the parasympathetic, but you should be able to get it. Okay, I got 50 seconds. Twenty seconds. Bless you. Okay. So the nicotinic receptors are always first, which means that second neuron, do we need that second neuron to send a signal or to not send a signal? We need it to send a signal. So the nicotinic receptors should always be what? They need to always be excited. So if they're excited, what term is that? So if you see the term nicotinic, unless it's talking about there's a drug blocking it or something like that, what should nicotinic always be? So it should be depolarization. Okay, now the muscarinic effectors, they can be D or hyper depending on which organ they're on. So this is parasympathetic. Is parasympathetic going to excite the heart or slow it down? Rest and digest. The resting part means our heart rate should not speed up. So would muscarinic receptors hyper or depolarize? Should muscarinic receptors on muscle in the stomach hyper or depolarize? Why? What is the stomach involved in? Rest and digest. Okay. So these are the types of questions that will be on the final. Okay, now we've done parasympathetic. The sympathetic division is going to be basically the opposite. The sympathetic, what two terms is involved with sympathetic? Fight and flight. And with the sympathetic division, notice that these red dots right here are basically in the opposite places than the green dots. So do you think we can call the sympathetic division craniosacral? No, we called the sympathetic division thoracolumbar. That is because the sympathetic division has its first motor neurons leaving the thoracic and the lumbar section. So sympathetic tells us fight and flight, the 4 E's. There's 4 E's again, y'all. Excitement, I heard emergency. Exercising and embarrassment, yeah. So the 4 E's. Okay, now, the thoracolumbar part just tells us where that neuron exits. So both of them refer to the same thing, it's just different ways of explaining it. Now your sympathetic division is wider spread because there's more of it. We have more neurons present, and it's going to have a wider spread effect on the body because it affects more structures. If it's something super crazy in your body, blame the sympathetic. Now, this is kind of hard for y'all to see, but it's in your book. How many neurons do we have in the pathway? How many neurons do we have in the motor pathway? Always 2. If you look real closely, we have our first motor neuron, which is the solid line. So all of these right here are the first motor neurons. And then do y'all see these dotted lines here? These are your second motor neurons. So what do we call the first motor neurons? And what do we call the second? Okay. Now the problem with the sympathetic division though is it has a lot more pathways. So there's a lot more options for it to go. Parasympathetic, 1 pathway. Sympathetic, multiple pathways. But if we look at it in general, it's the same setup. How many motor neurons do we see in this picture? We see 2. What does that first motor neuron produce no matter what? Okay, so since that first motor neuron always releases ACH, what is that first motor neuron called? Okay. Now, that first motor neuron always releases ACH. So what receptors are going to be on that second motor neuron? What receptors are always first? Okay, and are we going to excite or inhibit those nicotinic receptors? We're going to want to excite them, so depolarization. Okay. Now, notice in this picture, what is the second motor neuron releasing? NE. Most of the time, that second motor neuron releases NE. But sometimes, do y'all remember the exception of when it releases ACH? Yeah, so I'm going to draw this out for y'all, but ACH can be released if we have sweat glands. So I'm about to draw out that picture y'all have in front of you. So we're going to go over the first pathway of the sympathetic system. I just wanted to do a quick overview of what we were seeing. Okay. Okay, our first motor neuron is going to be pretty short, and it's always going to release ACH. Since it always releases ACH, what do we call this first motor neuron? Okay, now you'll notice in this first picture, I have 2 different pathways. I have pathway A and pathway B. We're going to talk about pathway A first. Okay. Since the second motor neuron, what do we call the second motor neuron? Okay. Now the second motor neuron in y'all's picture is releasing a different receptor. A different neurotransmitter. It's releasing NE. Since it releases NE, what type of neuron is it? Okay. Now, where do these 2 neurons meet? What do we just call the generic name for that swelling? Okay. But now I want y'all to look really quickly. Y'all have 1, 2, 3 different pathways that the sympathetic system can take. It all depends on the ganglion pathway. So this first one that we're drawing, this pathway, the neurons are going to meet each other right beside the spinal cord. This is called the chain ganglia. Where do you wear chains? Around your neck. Okay. So on both sides of your spinal cord, you will see chains. So let's see. Please erase my ink. No, it won't. Okay, that's fine. Do y'all see this chain right here? And then I kind of drew over this chain over here. But basically, these are swellings. They're right to the side of the spinal cord. They're on both sides, so they're paired. And we call them chain because they look like a chain that you would wear around your neck. The chain ganglia is the pathway that neurons take when they want to innervate organs in your thoracic cavity. So the chain ganglia is the pathway that neurons take when they want to innervate organs in your thoracic cavity. So no matter where this chain ganglia is, when those two neurons meet, that second neuron is going to travel to what area of your body? The thoracic cavity. So basically, when these two guys meet, their predestined location, they know they're going to somewhere where your heart, lungs, blood vessels, somewhere in the chest area. Now, most of the time, they do release NE. But sometimes, we will draw this right up here, they are going to release ACH. If that postganglionic neuron releases ACH, can we call it adrenergic anymore? What do we call it at this point? But when is the only time that postganglionic neuron can release ACH? What does it have to be going to? So this is our little sweat gland guy. He's sweating. So the only time in the sympathetic system, the only time that ACH will be released at the second neuron is when it's going to what? Sweat glands. All over your body except for what two spots? What's on your hands and your soles? Thick skin, except for thick skin. Okay, so let's talk about the receptors. Y'all already know about these receptors. Since this first neuron releases ACH, what has to be on the second neuron cell body? Which one? Which one's always first? Nicotinic. So we always are going to have nicotinic here. It doesn't matter where we're talking about, we always have nicotinic here. Okay? So this is the same idea. We're going to have nicotinic here. Are we going to want to excite or inhibit? Okay, now the problem is NE is not a cholinergic neuron. NE comes from an adrenergic neuron. Adrenergic neurons don't like nicotinic and muscarinic. Adrenergic neurons like what? Alphas and betas. So we're going to have alphas and betas here. If it's a 1, is it going to be excitatory or inhibitory? If it's a 2, okay. Now what about up here, this pathway, pathway B? Pathway B releases ACH. Does ACH like alpha beta? What is ACH like? The muscarinic ones. Why muscarinic? Are we at the end of the pathway or in the middle of the pathway? We're at the end. So this is going to be M's. Okay, so this is just one pathway. Again, everything is labeled on here for y'all. I have little key at the bottom, M's, N's, little hooks, little wrenches for the for alphas and betas. So everything's listed on here that I drew. It's just a little bit nicer looking. Okay, but this is only one pathway. This is the pathway that takes signals to your chest area. Do we have other parts of your body? Yeah, what's under your chest area? The abdomen, and what's underneath the abdomen area? The pelvic. So we have to somehow get information there. So we're going to have another, we'll go over those in a second. We're going to have another pathway. Our next pathway is going to be the second picture. Okay, in this picture, what I want y'all to notice, how many neurons do we have in this picture? So this is the third page. How many neurons do we have in this picture that I drew? We got 2. That always stays true. What do we call that first neuron? We call that first neuron preganglionic. What does that first neuron always release? ACH. Okay, what do we call that second neuron? Postganglionic. Okay, now in this particular picture, if you look at it closely, what you're seeing is that first neuron is passing the chain ganglia. So this little red neuron right here is just going right through the chain ganglia, so it's not stopping there. Instead, it's meeting its second neuron in front of the spinal cord. So that big swelling in front of the spinal cord is known as the prevertebral ganglia. The prevertebral. What does pre mean? Before or after? Before. So the prevertebral ganglia is in front of the spinal cord. They are not paired, they are single. And you have a lot of prevertebral ganglia. They're going to be named for blood vessels. All you really need to know, though, is prevertebral. Yes, right in front of it. Okay, the prevertebral ganglia is the pathway the neurons take when they go to your abdominopelvic cavity. So, organs such as your stomach, intestines, livers, kidneys, reproductive, urinary. So anything that's in your abdominopelvic cavity, this is the pathway that they take through the prevertebral ganglia. So, one pathway is the chain ganglia. If it goes through the chain ganglia, where is it going in your body? Chest or stomach area? Okay. If it goes in front of your spinal cord, we call it prevertebral ganglia. Is that going to your chest or stomach area? Abdominopelvic stomach area. And those are just named based on blood vessels. Okay. But we have a third pathway. Our third pathway skips everything and goes directly to the adrenal gland. So our third pathway is going to go through all the ganglia, but it doesn't stop there. Our third pathway goes directly to the adrenal gland. So that's that last picture in this packet. If you look at the last picture, you'll notice that that first neuron is going through the ganglia on the side. What's that ganglia on the side called? Chain. Then it curves around and goes through the ganglia in front of it. What's the one in front of it called? What? Prevertebral, but it doesn't stop there. Instead, it just bypasses it and goes directly to what? The adrenal gland. Now, the adrenal gland is on top of the kidney. The kidney is not drawn in this picture. But if I drew the kidney, I'll just go back to this picture. That's not in that picture either. If I drew the kidney would be right here. Okay, so the adrenal gland is just right on top of the kidney. Okay, now what's unique about this pathway is only for the adrenal gland, so it doesn't affect any other organ directly. It's all an indirect effect. Okay, so this first neuron goes directly to the adrenal gland. What does that first neuron always release no matter what? ACH. Now, your adrenal gland doesn't actually have the postganglionic neurons. So it doesn't have a neuron inside of it. Instead, it has these little cells. They're called chromaffin cells. I really don't care if you know that name. You can just know that the adrenal gland has cells inside of it. On these cells are going to be receptors that love ACH. What receptors are always first in the pathway? So on these cells, we're going to have nicotinic receptors. Are those receptors going to be excited or inhibited? They're always going to be excited. Nicotinic receptors are always going to be what? Which is D or hyper. Okay. Now, when these receptors are excited, it tells your adrenal gland to release epinephrine and norepinephrine. Y'all are probably pretty familiar with epinephrine. What do a lot of people carry around that are allergic to stuff? EpiPens. Okay, norepinephrine is a modified epinephrine in your body. Okay. Now, when your adrenal gland releases these chemicals, they go directly into your bloodstream. So at this point, what is a chemical that travels in your blood called? It's produced by the endocrine system, a hormone. So at this point, what we're seeing is that norepinephrine can be a neurotransmitter. That's how we've talked about it up until this point. Or if it's released into your blood, what is it in your blood now? A hormone. So neurotransmitters can act as hormones. Hormones can act as neurotransmitters. Now, when it's released into your blood covers your entire body, head to toe. Have any of y'all almost been in a wreck? Okay. What happens to your heart rate, to your breathing rate, to that feeling in your stomach? Does it speed up or slow down? Speed up. Even if you avoided the wreck, does that feeling go away immediately? No. It's lingering, right? Sometimes it's just a minute. Sometimes it's still 20 minutes later. You're like, holy, I almost got in a wreck. Now, why do you think that is? Everything we've been talking about to this point has been isolated between two neurons. All of a sudden, these hormones are now in your bloodstream. What's going to affect more of your body, your bloodstream or a neuronal synapse? Bloodstream. So the reason you feel uneasy after any type of situation, fight or flight, doesn't matter if it's something that's dangerous or something that really excites you and you still feel good 10 minutes later, is because adrenaline, epinephrine, was released into your bloodstream, covers your body head to toe. So it has a wider spread effect. Now, usually when we get rid of neurotransmitters in just a synapse, so like if I go back to this picture, if we get rid of neurotransmitters between this red and this black one right here, that's not the picture I should have been using, sorry. If we get rid of neurotransmitters between this red and this black right here, they're just going to be degraded immediately. But if a hormone's in your entire body throughout your bloodstream, do you think we can degrade it that quickly? So when your adrenal glands release hormones into the bloodstream, the only thing that makes it go away is time. It's just time till your body can break it down. And that is why anytime you're in one of those situations, the ease, those effects are longer lasting. Because the only thing that can get rid of norepinephrine and epinephrine in the bloodstream is time. We got to break it down over time. Okay. So in this particular picture, there's not technically two neurons. We have our first neuron, the preganglionic neuron. And then we have these cells that are acting as the postganglionic neurons, but they're not true neurons. When those cells get excited, what do those cells release? Norepinephrine and epinephrine, and where do those directly go? To the bloodstream. So just this particular pathway alone is more widespread and has a more daunting effect on your body than everything we've talked about together. So just this pathway. Okay. So your sympathetic system can take 3 different routes. It can go to the side. Those 2 neurons can communicate on the side of your spinal cord. That's called the ganglion, where they meet. And if it meets in the chain, it's going to your thoracic or to your abdominopelvic. Thoracic, okay? If they meet in front of your spinal cord, what part of your body are they going to? The abdominopelvic, okay? And then our third pathway is kind of a neat little exception. It only goes to one structure in your body, and what structure is that? The adrenal gland. And the second neuron in that pathway is really not a neuron. The second neuron is really just cells that release into the bloodstream. So it still has two parts to it, but it's not technically a postganglionic neuron. Okay, what does the sympathetic system release the most of, NE or ACH? Okay, so most of the sympathetic system, so most of those postganglionic neurons release NE, which means they're adrenergic. Okay, some postganglionics will release ACH, but only to what? Everywhere except for where? And what are palms and soles? What type of skin? It's just easier to write thick skin. Okay. So your sympathetic's just a little bit more challenging because there's more options for your body to take. Now, let's go grab those clickers and get some practice. You still got 7-8 minutes. The more exposed you get, it's going to crash on us. Okay, let me get this up. Okay, they are up. So NT stands for neurotransmitter. The key here is preganglionic neuron. I'm missing 2 people. Give that answer. I'm about to stop it. Okay. What neurotransmitter, doesn't matter what system we talk about, is released from preganglionic? Always ACH, okay? Oh, we went over this last week, way early last week. See if y'all remember this. Okay, I'm going to give you all 28 more seconds. Okay, missing 1 person. Okay. Now, this was something that you would have to put something we went over in the spinal cord together with what we did today. Okay, so the sympathetic system, is that craniosacral or thoracolumbar? Look in y'all's notes. We went over this today. Thoracolumbar. So your sympathetic system is thoracolumbar. So what 3 answers can we automatically get rid of? Okay, so if you're taking a test, these are the types of clues you want to look for. Okay, now, when we went over the anatomy of the spinal cord, we do have lateral and anterior gray horns. The only time we have lateral gray horns is in the thoracolumbar region for the sympathetic system, okay? Your whole spinal cord has anterior gray horns, but lateral gray horns are only in the thoracolumbar region. Only in the thoracolumbar region. Okay, so the answer there is B. Okay, here's another one. Okay, missing 4 people. Okay, overall, great. If we go back to this picture, This is a bad drawing of the sympathetic system, but this pathway releases what? What are these little diamonds I drew? And then this pathway is releasing. Okay, so the answer would be C, both ACH, RNE. Hold on, we got some more. Let me get to them. Okay, true, false one. Missing one person. Awesome job. Everyone got it right? What is the answer? Okay, this is the last thing we're going to do. Going to be 5 answers once y'all finish. Well, never mind. We're just going to do it. Okay. Take a second. Goes to organs in the thoracic area. Prevertebral, chain ganglia, or adrenal cells. Okay. Organs in the abdominopelvic. Pre. Okay. Keyword is hormones. Which of those 3 pathways releases hormones? The adrenal. Always paired ganglia, meaning we have one on each side of the spinal cord. And then single name for the arteries. Free. Okay. So one of the things I can tell you is your final is going to have about 20 questions, maybe 15 on this chapter specifically. They're going to be application questions mostly. I have great final reviews up for y'all. And most of the final reviews, I usually have a column, because they're Jeopardy final reviews, that is going to be for the autonomic nervous system. I highly suggest looking at that, going through that. That's going to help you a lot. The other thing is I'm going to do a final review on Tuesday. Finals technically start on Tuesday, so we don't have class. There is a final in here at 8, so we can't meet in here at 8, but I'm going to hold it for 10. If you can come, fantastic. If you cannot come, I do record them. There are no points associated with it, but it's a great time to review material for the final. Okay, it's going to be a brand new review, so it's one that I haven't written yet. I write new reviews. That's why there are so many Jeopardy reviews, is because I write them each semester based on the tests that I write. So I haven't written y'all's final yet, so I haven't written the review yet. So I'll mail all this out. Just keep it in your head. Tuesday at 10 a.m. in this room, we'll have a review. Okay, y'all have a wonderful weekend. Double check. Make sure you check all of your announcements so you don't miss dates.